here, my partner in crime is the one and only Kathleen Selmans.
Hi, everyone.
We are talking update today because we've been doing these for a very short time. You and I have been partners. We talked about partnership in February, but we really didn't get rolling at all until April. And frankly, if we looked at getting our feet on the ground, it wasn't until maybe mid-May.
Yeah. And
I would think.
For me, it was both feet on the ground after I left my day job.
Yeah, which has only been a matter of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give everybody an idea, before then we had some sponsor posts coming in. We had sponsors on the podcast. So we had little trickles of revenue, but nothing that was, besides the podcast sponsorships, that we knew were recurring. And obviously podcast sponsors are only for 3 months at a time. That's the way we do our contract anyway. So we knew that at the end of 3 months that could go away. That could still go away. However, as the podcast keeps growing, that becomes more of what I think would be I hate saying the term sure thing because it's never a sure thing. But I guess, Kathleen, the big point is if our sponsor, we've had more requests for sponsorship, which shows me that we could probably, we don't want to because we love our sponsors, but we could find sponsorship for the podcast because the numbers are just growing incredibly quickly.
Yes, we could.
And so, but the blog is the bigger deal. The blog, since Kathleen has come on board, has tripled in readership. Is that the number? I didn't pull the exact number, but it's got to be close to tripled.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, and that means we have gone from really no income a month to about $4,500 a month in income. So, and we should have broken that down ahead of time. We didn't. You know what? Kathleen already said we're going to on the blog, right?
Yep, we'll break it down.
Yeah, we'll break that down more for people, and we will track that. And that's how happy we are about the fact that we're making some money. Do you want to let him out? So while Kathleen's letting the dog go, you know, I had this mentor that gave me some good advice. And he said, you know, I made good money my first year as a financial advisor. And he said, Joe, you have a couple choices. You can either accept that number of chips and continue to play just that level of game, or you can push those chips across the table, reinvest them, and say, I'm playing for more, which meant at the time hiring assistant, hiring some staff, hiring out some services so I could take my unique talent and do more with that. So, Kathleen, you and I had that same discussion. We said, okay, $4,500. I mean, we could each make a couple $1,000s, and we could then take the rest of the money and just use it in maintaining the site. You know, if that's $500, that'd be $6,000 a year just in maintaining. That's probably enough for duct tape. So, what did we decide to do?
We decided to double down. I just got back from Vegas.
Yeah, and did you win in Vegas?
I did, yeah.
Well, you got to win even bigger here, right?
Yes.
So then we said, all right, so how are we going to invest this money? And we want to talk about that, our decision making there, because it's the same decision making that everybody goes through. And as we first started talking about for-profit blogging, remember, we're not doing these because we're perfect. We're doing it to chronicle the day in and day out life of people making the same decisions that you are. So we looked at 4 things. The first thing we looked at was hiring writers. Hiring more writers because we already have a couple on our Frugal Portland site. So why would what would hiring more writers do for us, Kathleen?
We would create content. Seems like we're always behind on content. There's a lot of great writers out there, and I think every blog needs more content.
Would we more good content?
Yes.
Especially, but does that replace us on the blogs, or is that in addition to the stuff that we already have going on in the blogs?
It would be in addition to.
Yeah, just have more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because those of you that have followed these videos from the beginning know that our goal with Stacking Benjamins is to have what we refer to as a theme park. And really, if you go to Stacking Benjamins anytime lately, our flagship site, you'll see that that's what it is. There's a lot going on at Stacking Benjamins, and our goal is to keep it going fast. And to tell you the truth, I mean, Kathleen, we're not even at a third of the content per day we want to have.
No.
we'd love to have it be 3 or 4 things a day, so that when you're bored, you come back and talk the lighter side of finance even more. The downside of writers?
Well, one, good writers are expensive, and two, we're cultivating a very specific style on Stacking Benjamins that is not easy to force, and not a good idea to force. And then the third thing is, since it only supplements, it's spending money on something that isn't going to create more time for either one of us to focus on the things we're best at.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, you know, writers don't necessarily, just because we have another writer and we have another piece doesn't mean more people are going to come. That presupposes that more people will come if we write more. And a couple of years ago, well, you were out drinking. I actually went to this session, Derek Halpern at FinCon. Remember that one that you guys skipped? Derek Halpern said, you know, spend more time marketing. And that doesn't help us spend more time marketing. But it does give us good stuff on the site. Mm-hmm. Our second thing was a community manager, somebody who would take over Twitter, Facebook, commenting on blogs, doing that kind of thing. How would that help us?
Get our name out to a lot of places. Commenting on blogs is something that is really cool for bloggers to see, oh, somebody from this site liked my post, responded to it. It's a comment on a post is a neat way for a blogger to know that what they're saying is being heard.
And it does something else too, which is it encourages other bloggers to talk about your site. And the more other bloggers talk about your site, your Alexa goes down, which I don't think is a huge deal. But the bigger deal is your domain authority. If you're being linked to fairly often, your domain authority will go up. And so that can potentially be a good strategy. Driving direct traffic that way to your site isn't that helpful. But
no.
we found, though, Pinterest and Facebook, man, it took forever to get there, but have been driving more and more traffic every month.
Yes. Yeah, social numbers are way up for Stacking Benjamins.
And if we had somebody who was doing that all the time and was making it quality content, that would be really awesome. So we thought about community manager. The downside of a community manager, I think number one, they would have to also write, which is more time, because I never take, it's going to sound horrible, but I never take community managers seriously. I think of them as shills unless they write on the site, right?
Yeah, it's easy to look like a hired gun.
Yeah, there's a few community managers that come to our site and we're like, yeah, okay, you were hired to just come here and leave a comment. But if it's somebody that writes every day on a site, then I feel better about that. The other thing about a community manager is I think to do it right is going to be pretty expensive. You really need to have somebody who you can have for a good number of hours to have any impact. They can have a big impact, but it's going to take a lot of money, I think. And the other thing, Kathleen, is that there's some people that we would love to hire, but our community, the people already know. And it's funny because people look at this as experience, and I don't look at it this way. If I hire somebody who's experienced in our little area of blogging, that's somebody that all the bloggers already know, and they don't think about them and think Stacking Benjamins. They think about that person and think that person's other stuff they have going on, their own things. So so it would really have to be somebody also that would, I mean, how do you find somebody that knows a lot about the area where you're blogging yet nobody knows them yet?
Right.
That's a difficult thing to do. Third thing is, so those two focus on the blog. The next two places that we looked at were the podcast, because really, if you think about it, the funnel of growth for the blog is here, where the funnel of growth for the podcast is already way up here. And so if we focus on the podcast instead of the blog, we'll probably see that wheel churn faster. So really we had a choice. Do we go with, you know, something that's already moving really quickly, or do we catch up the half that's just really starting to roll, the blog half? But on that side, if we went with the podcast, the first thing to do would be to hire somebody to schedule appearances for us. And I'll talk to that one because this is my part of the job. There are some people out there whose whole job it is, and they're very good at it, is A, scheduling people to be on your show, and B, getting you on other people's show. So, which is a huge time saver. I don't have to go chase guests anymore. I can have guests come to me already. I already have that already taken care of. I just show up to record, maybe do, prep for those interviews. For me, getting on other podcasts, we see a bump in our show. Every single time I go on somebody else's podcast, we see a nice little bump in the show numbers, which are sponsors pay us based on the number of people that listen to our show, so that directly drives more income. So that stuff is all good. The downside there is I've never this is going to sound so cocky. This is going to sound bad, but I've never had a problem booking guests myself. I've never had a problem, and when I've focused on trying to get on other people's shows, I've tried to be a good enough guest that most of the time people are nice enough to let me come on their show too. It just, I never have time to do it. So I can focus on that myself, or I can hire somebody else to do it. And really, I think, Kathleen, there's not a lot of people that can say that it's very easy for them to get guests all the time, and it's fairly, I'm not going to say easy, but they've cultivated relationships to the point that they can get on other people's shows. People call that like a unique ability. And I think that's something I'm pretty good at. So why would I hire somebody else to do the piece that I'm already good at?
Right.
That's the downside. And the last one is to hire a sound engineer. As Kathleen will tell you, she does the blog most of the time, and I spend most of my time editing audio. So a sound engineer would be somebody we'd hire. Now, we already have an editor who takes out the ums and ahs and makes the audio sound perfect, but somebody who's going to actually put together the show so that it's snappy, it's funny, and the segments go. Our show's a magazine-style show, so it's not necessarily easy to put together. Steve Stewart over at Money Plan SOS has tried putting our show together before, and he said he'll never do it again. because there's so many sections versus other shows. But an engineer would take that off my plate, and then I could spend more time getting myself on other shows and helping out with the blog, doing that kind of thing. The downside, again, that could be pretty expensive.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation, though, because once we decided we weren't going to take payroll until sometime after now, then the conversation was, how can we spend our money best? So, right, Joe said, in the last couple of months, we've tripled the traffic on the blog. Could we do that again? Probably. There's a lot more to do on the blog side than we have done. So there's no chance that we can't grow that. But the podcast is already way bigger than the blog. So what do we want to do? How do we want to spend our money to free up time for Joe to get the podcast bigger and hope that the podcast carries the blog with it?
Which the tough part about that discussion is that the podcast is partly cult of personality, and really the bigger that any brand goes, the less you want to be cult of personality. And we had a long talk about that too, about do we really want it to be, do we really want to make the podcast bigger without the blog catching up? Because, I mean, if this is morbid, but if I had a heart attack today, and Kathleen is now on the podcast all the time, I'm thinking initially, until people got used to you, we'd lose quite a few listeners,
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And then putting the podcast together, because I'm the only one that does it right now, is it so do we really build the podcast? That was a long discussion. God, we must have talked about that for 2 hours.
Yeah, it was a good talk though, because it's one of those things where we're in this to make a viable business. So
it's a real inflection point for the business. I mean,
absolutely.
It's really,
it came a lot sooner than I thought it would.
Yeah.
Not complaining.
No, me neither. No, I'm very happy, and I'm very flattered that our audience likes us that much. I feel like that. What's it? That's that Sally Field. They like us. They really like us. That's been very cool. So we decided, of those four, to hire the engineer.
Yes.
For the podcast. And we actually then, right after we decided that, the funny thing was we didn't spend nearly as much money as we thought we would, because we hired a 16-year-old kid.
who's going to learn how to do something that is super marketable well before he's in college. So,
and just to give you a side of how we did that, I always prefer people that don't have experience, people that have experience, because learning from the E-Myth teaches that all experience is most of the time is somebody else's bad habits. So if I'm hiring somebody for a bunch of bad habits that I have to unteach, why don't I just teach them to do it the right way initially? But you have to have somebody with aptitude, and I was listening to a good podcasting podcast. How's that for meta? A podcast on podcast called The Feed, and it's Libsyn. And a guy was on there, and he was talking about how he's a podcast producer himself. And because, Kathleen, you and I had just been talking about this, my ears perk up, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should hire this guy. And this guy said, well, here's what I do. I have 7 college kids from the local college I hire. And I went, why wouldn't I hire somebody that's a local college kid? Because we have a branch of Texas A&M in my backyard. So I thought, I mean, literally 5 miles from the basement. So what I did was started to reach out to people because I know people over at A&M, and then I realized that there is a kid that I know whose dad is a professional disc jockey. And this kid helps him when he goes and does dances. So he's already familiar with mixing. He's already familiar with fading audio in and out. He's already familiar with keeping up the rhythm because I know this guy really well. I know his dad really well. So he's very comfortable with some of the same philosophies I had when I was a wedding DJ. And I thought, this is a kid who's incredibly young. We can probably train him and get him for a lot less money, and it's great experience for him. He's in a way better job than he is working at McDonald's like I did.
Right.
So he's making more money. He's not working at McDonald's, and for me, I can train him to do it exactly the way I want. The bad news is it's going to take a little while longer, and I probably can't trust him with all of it. I'm probably going to have to look over his shoulder more than if I hired somebody that was more mature.
At least at first.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes, but that's the initial decision. We hired a kid named Logan. So congratulations, Logan. Just happened yesterday. So that's it. That was we've had 2 long ones in a row, Kathleen, but these have been big moments.
It's true. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. If you've got stuff you want to talk to us about, email us. There's a contact form on the website, forprofitblogging.com. Check out our newsletter over there, too. We got good stuff there.
Okay. Thank you.